Hello, third period. Okay, so this is the next section of your reading homework. I've recorded the homework in 3 segments. This is the first segment, and it starts on page 101. Just reminding you need 3 annotations. Follow the format in the reading guide. We've got to be paid for carrying them up by hand. Don't think I'm against it, but the bookkeepers won't agree to the higher rate. The bookkeepers? I've got a whole squad sweating to keep those 4 masons at work. How much do you think we'll earn? Tyrin shouted, pressing on without a break. Mortar, he called down. Mortar, echoed Shukov. They had leveled off the whole of the third row. On the fourth, they'd really get going. Time to stretch the string for the next row, but he could manage this way too. Durr went off across the open ground, looking haggard. To warm up in the office, something must have been eating him. But he should have thought a bit before taking on a wolf like Turin. He should keep pleasant with squad leaders like that. Then he'd have nothing to worry about. The camp authorities didn't insist on his doing any real hard work. He received top-level rations. He lived in a separate cabin. What else did he want? Giving himself airs, trying to be smart? The men coming up with the mortar said that the mechanic and superintendent had left. The motor was past repair. Very well, haul them up by hand. For as long as Shukov had worked with machinery, the machines had either broken down or been smashed by the Zeks. He'd seen them wreck a log conveyor by shoving a beam under the chain and leaning hard on it to give themselves a breather. They were stacking log by log, with never a moment to stretch their backs. Damn the whole blank a lot of you, shouted Tyrin, warming up. Pavlo's asking how you're fixed for mortar, someone called from below. Mix some more. We've got half a box mixed. Mix another. What a pace they'd set. They were driving along the 5th row now. Then they had to bend over double when they were working on the 1st row. But now the wall had risen shoulder high, and why shouldn't they race on? There were no windows or doors to allow for, just a couple of adjoining blank walls and plenty of blocks. Shukov should have stretched the string higher, but there was no time for it. The 82nd have gone off to hand in their tools, Kopchik reported. Turin looked at him witheringly. Mind your own business, Squirt. Bring up some blocks. Shukov looked about. Yes, the sun was beginning to set. It had a grayish appearance as it sat in a red haze, and they'd got into the swing. Couldn't be better. They'd started on the 5th row now. Ought to finish it today, level it off. The mortar carriers were snorting like winded horses. Vinovsky was quite gray in the face. He might not be 40, but he wasn't far off it. The cold was growing keener. Busy as they were, Shukov's hands, the frost nipped his fingers through the shabby mittens, and it was piercing his left boot too. He stamped his foot. Thud, thud. By now, he need not to stoop to the wall, but he still had to bend his aching back for each block and each scoop of mortar. Hey, boys, he pestered the men handling the blocks. You better put them on the wall for me. Heave them up here. The captain would have gladly obliged, but lacked the strength. He wasn't used to the work. But Alosha said, All right, Ivan Denisovich, show me where to put them. You could count on Alosha, did whatever asked of him. If everybody in the world was like that, Shukov would have done likewise. If a man asked for help, why not help him? Those Baptists had something there. The rail changed, the signal went dinning all over the site and reached the power station. They had been caught with some unused mortar. Just when they'd got into the swing of it. Mortar, mortar, Turin shouted. A new boxful had only just been mixed. They had to go on laying. There was no other way. If they left anything in the box next morning, they could throw the whole lot of it to hell. The mortar would have petrified. It wouldn't yield to a pickaxe. Don't let me down, brother, Shukov shouted. Kilgus was fuming. He didn't like speed-ups, but he pressed on all the same. What else could he do? Pavlo ran up with a barrow, a trowel in his belt, and began laying himself. 5 trowels on the job now. Now look out for where the rows met. Shukov visualized what shape of block was needed there, and shoving a hammer into Losha's hand, egged him on. Knock a bit off this one. Haste makes waste. Now that all of them were racing one another, Shukov bided his time, kept an eye on the wall. He pushed Senka to the left and took over, laying himself toward the main corner on the right. It would be a disaster if the walls overlapped or if the corner wasn't level. Cost him half a day's work tomorrow. Stop, he shoved Pavlo away from a block and leveled it himself, and from his place in the corner he noticed that Senka's section was sagging. He hurried over to Senka and leveled it out with 2 blocks. The captain brought up a load of mortar, enough for a good horse. Another 2 barrows full, he said. The captain was tottering, but he went on sweating away. Shukov had had a horse like that one. He thought a lot of that horse, but they had driven it to death. They'd worked the hide off it. The top rim of the sun dipped below the horizon. Now, without Kopchik having to tell them, they saw that the squad had not only turned in their tools, but were pouring out to the gates. No one came out into the open immediately after the signal. Only a fool would go and freeze out there. They sat in the warmth. But the moment came, by agreement between the squad leaders, when all the squads poured out together. Without this agreement, the Zeks, the stubborn lot, would have sat each other out in the warmth till midnight. Tyrion himself realized that he'd cut things too fine. The man in charge of the tool store must be cursing him out. Hey, he shouted, use enough of that. Carriers, go and scrape the big box. Throw what's left into the hole there and scatter some snow onto it to keep it hidden. You, Pavlo, take a couple of men, collect the tools, and hand them in. I'll send Kopchik after you with the 3 trowels. We'll use up the last 2 loads of mortar before we knock off. Everyone dashed to his job. They took Shukov's hammer from him and wound up his string. The mortar carriers and the block lifters hurried down into the machine room. They had nothing more to do up there. 3 masons remained on top, Kilga, Senka, and Shukov. Turin walked around to see how much wall they had built. He was pleased. Not bad in half a day, without any blank lift. Shukov noticed that there was a little mortar left in Kilgas's hod. He didn't want to waste it, but was worried that the squad leader might be reprimanded if the trowels were handed in late. Listen, men, he said. Give your trowels to Kopchik. Mine's not on the list, so I won't have to hand it in. I'll keep going. So notice, guys, Shukov's offering to work extra. He's offering to work extra. Turin said with a laugh, how can we ever let you go? We just can't do without you. Shukov laughed too and went on working. Kilgas took the trowels. Senka went on handing blocks to Shukov. They poured Kilgas's mortar into Shukov's hod. Kopchik ran across to the tool store to overtake Pavlo. The rest were just as anxious to be in time and hurried over to the gates without Turin. A squad leader is a power, but the escort is a greatest power still. They list latecomers, and that means the guardhouse for you. There was a terrible crowd near the gates now. Everyone had collected there. It looked as if the escort had come out and started counting. They counted the prisoners twice on the way out, once before they unbolted the gates to make sure they were safe in opening them, and again when the gates had been opened and the prisoners were passing through. And if they thought they'd miscounted, they recounted outside the gates. To hell with the mortar, said Tyrion with a gesture of impatience. Sling it over the wall. Don't wait, leader. Go ahead. You're needed there. Shukov usually addressed Turin more respectfully as Andrei Provokovich, but now after working like that, he felt equal to the squad leader. He didn't put it to himself, look, I'm your equal. He just knew it. And as Turin strode down the ramp, he called after him jokingly, why do these bastards make the day so short? We were just getting to our stride when they called it off. Shukov was left alone now with Senka. You couldn't say much to him. Besides, you didn't have to tell him things. He was the wisest of them all. He understood without needs of words. Slap on the mortar, down with the block, press it home. See, it's straight. Mortar, block, mortar, block. Wasn't it enough that Tyrion had told himself not to bother about the mortar? Just throw it over the wall and blank off. But Shukov wasn't made that way. 8 years in a camp couldn't change his nature. He worried about anything he could make use of, about every scrap of work he could do. Nothing must be wasted without good reason. Mortar, block, finish, blank you, shouted Senka. Let's get out of here. He picked up a barrel and ran down the ramp. But Shukov, and if the guards had put the dogs on him, it would make no difference, ran to the back and looked about. Not bad. Then he ran and gave the wall a good look over, to the left and to the right. His eyes was as accurate as a carpenter's level, straight and even. His hands were as young as ever. He dashed down the ramp. Senka was already out of the machine shop and running down the slope. Come on, he shouted over his shoulder. Run ahead. I'll catch up, Shukov gestured. But he went into the machine shop. He couldn't simply throw his trowel down. He might not be there the next day. They might send the squad off to the socialist way of life settlement. It could be 6 months before he returned to the power station. Would that mean he was to throw down his trowel? If he'd swiped it, he had to hang on to it. Both the stoves had been doused. It was dark, frightening. Frightening not because it was dark, but because everyone had left. Because he alone might be missing at the count by the gates, and the guards would beat him. Yet, his eyes darted here, darted there, and, spotting a big stone in the corner, he pulled it aside, slipped his trowel under it, and hid it. So that's that. Now to catch up with Senka. Senka had stopped after running 100 paces or so. Senka would never leave anyone in a jam. Pay for it, then together. They ran neck and neck, the tall and short. Senka was a head taller than Shukov, and a big head it was, too. There are loafers who race one another of their own free will around a stadium. Those devils should be running after a full day's work, with aching back and wet mittens and worn-out palenque, and in the cold, too. They panted like mad dogs. All you could hear was their hoarse breathing. While Turin was at the gates, he'd explained. They were running straight into the crowd. It scared you. Hundreds of throats booing you at once and cursing you up and down. Wouldn't you be scared if you had 500 men blowing their tops at you? But what about the guards? That was the chief thing. No trouble with them. Turin was there in the last row. He must have explained, taken the blame on his own shoulders. But the men yelled, the men swore, and what swearing? Even Senka couldn't help hearing, and drawing a deep breath, gave back as good as he got. He'd kept quiet all his life, but now how he bellowed, raised his fist too, ready to pick a fight right away. The men fell silent. Someone laughed. Hey, 104th, came a shout. Your deaf guy's a fake. We just tested him. Everyone laughed, the guards too, 4 and 5s. They didn't open the gate. They didn't trust themselves. They pushed the crowd back from the gates. Everyone stuck to the gates like idiots, as if they'd get out quicker that way. 4 and 5s, first, second, third. Each 5, as it was called, took a few paces forward. While Shukov was recovering his breath, he looked up. The moon had risen and was frowning, crimson-faced. Yesterday at this hour it had stood much higher. Pleased that everything had gone so smoothly, Shukov nudged the captain in the ribs and said, Listen, Captain, where does the science of yours say the old moon goes afterwards? All right, guys, that's the end of the first segment of the reading. I'll record the other two. God bless you and have a great day.